People who have quit their jobs on the spot. What was the moment when you finally snapped? When I was in college, I waited tables at a restaurant that was open on Thanksgiving after I had already worked the lunch shift, covering for someone who took off for the holiday. I was ready to finish my shift and head out so I could have Thanksgiving dinner with my family when my manager informed me that they were going to need me to cover dinner shift too because one of the older waitresses called out, probably to spend Thanksgiving with her family. When I told him I had plans already, he said I needed to cover the shift since I had the least seniority and they wouldn't need someone who isn't a team player, implying I'd be fired if I didn't cover it. I told him I don't need this job that much to miss Thanksgiving dinner with my family and handed in my apron and left and never returned. Worked at Staples. Got transferred to a crappy store where I moved after being top of sales for 3 months. New boss tells me I'm the worst seller he ever saw. He told me I didn't sell a single extra warranty for the month and a half I was there and stuff. Told him I was there for 3 months and was on top of regional charts for that entire time. He told me no, that I had no proof. I got up and left his office. He follows me in the store almost yelling for me to come back and that he wasn't done. I took my shirt off, put it on a shelf and left. I got a call next morning. My supervisor calls me, telling me the manager fricked up and wanted me back. He mistook me for another guy with the same first name as me. I told them to politely frick off and that they would never see me again. This job is more important than your education. I worked for a local Target in electronics. A store manager who was not my direct manager called me at my father's funeral to ask where I was and why I wasn't at the electronics boat cash register. Days earlier I had told my manager that I wouldn't be there because I had to attend my father's funeral. Was told it was okay, but this other manager just wasn't having it and explained to me that she was in the store the same day her child was born. I have never worked for a more ignorant and inept manager. I was working in a ski shop at a local ski resort. They used a shuttle to ferry us up and down the canyon since most employees lived in a town nearby. They asked me if I was taking the shuttle and said yes, but that I needed to put away the cash drawer real quick. When I finished and went down to meet them, they were gone. I was stuck on the mountain, without a vehicle, in 17-degree weather. Luckily my family had a cabin about 10 miles away to which I had a key, but I emailed my resignation on my walk to the cabin. I had a boss that would schedule me 6 days a week, all split shifts, which would generally be 10-3, then 5-10, which pretty much took up all my time. One day she was on my ass about how I don't seem motivated to be here, that I'm lazy and to come back after my split with a better attitude. I told her I'm not coming back and she can frick off. Was a server in a crappy restaurant where the owner's kids were managers and had no prior work experience. One kid set up a deal with a bank for a private party and I ended up just serving and bartending for this group of 20-30 my entire shift. Comes time for them to pay the hill, and the manager that set up the special deal, it was a limited menu but for a huge discounted /set price, wasn't there. So the manager that was there assumed the previously discussed amount included tip, 20% minimum on groups of 8 or more. It did not. So after closing out, I was informed that due to their miscommunication, I would not be receiving any money at all. Morizo. Because I served many of the patrons alcohol, I had to tip out the bartender at the main bar, even though I actually bartended by myself at the wine bar. So this little ashat wanted me to pay something like $150 at the end of a full shift. Walked out and never went back. Place cracked down a few months later, to the surprise of no one. It was just when I was in high school working at McDonald's. Before they would give you a raise you had to do all this bullcrap. Train people, watch videos, take quizzes. Really easy but annoying and tedious. I did all of this. Didn't get a raise. I asked every store manager and they said that it would show up on my next check. Eventually I called the regional manager who had put his phone up in the break room, but he answered, "Don't call this number," and hung up on me. So I told my boss I quit and just walked out. I was a nanny for 3 kids. They were hell to deal with. One day, I told the 11-year-old it was time to sit down and do homework, Apparently this angered him because his response was to try to stab me. After I took it away from him, I immediately called the parent and told her to come home now. I was done. As soon as she got home I left. Her response was, well, they've hit all their sitters. She never told me, before accepting the position, that the children had such severe issues that were way out of my league. I occasionally go by their house on errands, and every single time I see the kids with a new nanny, they all just quit shortly after being hired. On a Monday morning, after my and my team's paycheck had been 2 weeks late, for like 100th time, I asked the boss if he had wired the money at all, as he had a habit of lying that he did, only to wire it days later. To which he responded with, we don't freaking start a freaking work week with such questions. We started with freaking reports from the week before. Frick him. I literally just quit. So I worked at my company for 3 years and was asking for more responsibility and a raise. Was told there was no room in the budget. Alright, not a problem. The new kid that joined just a few months prior got a sign-on bonus, commission bonus and raise within 2-3 months. This kid loved to talk about everything. I told my boss I wanted to put in my 2 weeks and he just stared at me. I asked if he wanted to know why, and he said, I'm not having this conversation while you're being emotional. I laughed at him, walked inside and said my goodbyes, and left on the spot. Now I'm enjoying my summer. I've told this story before. I had just started working at a secure psychiatric facility for emotionally disturbed children at the start of the summer, end of May. At the interview I told the HR person that I had a pre-planned trip home for later in the summer and that, since I was driving, I was going to be away for 2 weeks. I hadn't been home to see my family for 2 years. I made it clear to her that, if this was going to be a problem, to let me know right then, and I would seek employment elsewhere. She reassured me it wouldn't be a problem and that she would leave a note in my file saying as much. So the time for my trip nears. I give them the 2 weeks notice as agreed upon at the interview, but my immediate supervisor refuses to approve the time off. Figuring it was a miscommunication, I tell the immediate super about the interview agreement with ours, that the issue was already settled at the initial interview. So she gives me this runaround and asks me to give her a couple of days to come up with a solution. Next day she calls me into her office and has the balls to say, okay, I know how we can work this. You can work a double shift on Sat, 18 hours mind you, then leave for home right after and make your drive, 30 hours non-stop, visit your family for 3 days then drive back, 30 hours non-stop, and arrive in time to work another double. I couldn't stop myself. I laughed uncontrollably. I asked her if she was seriously suggesting I stay awake for 48 hours straight, 30 of those spent on highways crossing the country. She just gave me the stupid smile and said, yes, you can do it. You have a responsibility to the center. I laughed in her face and told her I wouldn't work for such a cesspool. A place that would dare suggest I put my personal safety in harm's way and wouldn't honor an agreement made. I quit in the spot. I was still scheduled for the rest of that week. They had the nerve to call me at home that night asking if I was coming in. I told the person who called no way in hell, and I told him what happened. Then the super called me and basically said I had to come in. I was scheduled. I suggested she could cover my shift. I mean, she already worked 9 hours. What was another 18? She could do it. I left for my trip the next day. I worked at a grocery store as a bagger and they asked me to clean a destroyed bathroom. I mean, crap everywhere. All over the toilet, the walls, the freaking ceiling. Anyways, I said this is not worth my minimum wage and left. Worst part is my friend got me the job there and they saved it for him to clean the next day. He quit on the spot also. I quit on the spot from a Verizon call center, but not for the reason you would think. I had a call where a guy wanted a cheaper plan and wanted it now. I did some number crunching so I could tell the guy exactly what his weird partial plan bill would look like, since he was changing his plan in the middle of his billing cycle and things will look weird on the next bill. I did the math and changed the plan and the guy was super happy. I feel good about being able to solve his issue. Fast forward, I get a failed survey from the guy. Now in my call center that means your pay gets docked. I'll listen to his recorded feedback and he is freaking out because he's angry he got a survey that had nothing to do with me or how I helped him. So I sent it to K asking them to overturn it so my pay doesn't get affected. They listened to the call and said my fail was valid because I had one part in my call where I was quiet for 30 seconds while doing math. I couldn't talk and crunch all the numbers. That was my last straw among a lot of other crap, so I rage quit. They asked if I wanted to finish my day first. I gave them my badge and left. Frick that. Frick Verizon. I worked at a call center in Canada that sold phone packages for a major US phone network. It was cold calls and we could see the customer's average monthly phone bill when we were speaking to them. I had an elderly lady whose bill was in the $30 a month range. Never made long distance calls, didn't want or need voicemail etc. I didn't even bother trying to sell her a package worth $120 a month. I didn't know I was being audited on that call and was called into the manager's office and had a strip tour of me. Quit on the spot. I had a job that always needed at least one person stationed there. At peak, it could go up to 6 if we opened other stations. Most times, I was the only person, but it was understood that if I requested a second person, I probably needed them. If not immediately, then within the next half hour. It was just after the Christmas peak when we needed the 6, and an hour into my shift I realized one person wasn't enough. So started asking for another person. Kept asking every 15 minutes because I was drowning, and it wasn't a slow drown. Second hour into the shift, an hour after I started asking, one of the managers decided to tell me the equivalent of "Oh, you're good. You don't need the help." Bitch, yes I do. And now, you need 2 people because I quit. I'm a nanny. The mom I was working for was an absolute nutcase. I loved all 4 children and they loved me dearly. I spent 50 hours a week at their house, on top of taking care of all 4 and making sure they were all at their 500,000 extracurricular activities and constantly entertained. She insisted her giant home be cleaned by me and all 6 people's laundry be done every single day. She liked the bins to be completely empty. I kept up with it. After a while she got more and more demanding, even leaving her dishes out after breakfast for me to clean. I talked to them about how my only responsibility should be the kids. They agreed. A couple weeks later she went back to her old self and was texting me after work no more than 10 minutes after I'd get out the door about dust and other petty things. I told her she needed to stop and reminded her about the conversation we had. She blew up and said if I didn't do better they'd have to find someone else. I drove straight to her house and dropped her car seats off out front. I never went back and I blocked her number. I miss the kids and hate that I couldn't say bye, but I don't regret it at all. I was working as a software developer for a company that, shall we say, didn't understand the value of its team. I could go on and on about the crap we had to put up with there. One day my direct boss, the only person in senior management who could tell his bullsack from a computer, who had personally hired all of us, and was our shield against the crap show of the rest of the company, told our team he was leaving. So we all were on edge. I had been promised a sizable performance bonus in lieu of a raise, because the CEO was a cheap piece of crap, and I was planning on quitting anyway, so I figured whatever. When my performance review came up, I wrote up a spreadsheet detailing how I had fulfilled every aspect of my bonus requirements, and I emailed it to my new supervisor. I didn't get a response, so I went into his office Friday morning and asked about it. He said that, before they could give me the bonus, I had to provide detailed documentation and training on all the code and work I'd done for the past year, because they couldn't guarantee I wouldn't just walk out the second I got my money. I told him they could either pay me the money they owed me for the work I'd done to date, which was the agreement, and I would do everything in my power to make sure they could continue if and when I left, or I could walk out at that moment and leave them with nothing. And I did exactly that. The entire dev team quit over the next 6 months. Telemarketing. The job sucked, but I needed the cash and knew that going in. My first day after training, I overheard 2 supervisors talking about the product I was selling. It was basically travel insurance. Lame. But okay. but the guy says we only call people with poor credit because we know most of them won't look into it once it shows up on their card. I just couldn't bring myself to scam people, no matter how much I needed the cash. Pallet of packs of bottled water toppled over, pinning me against a wall. Managed to get my radio and ask from someone to come out the back and help me immediately. 15 minutes later I get assistance. Not from the staff, mind you. Someone coming in to start their shift. Hauling pallets is meant to be a 2-person job, but in the 4 years I was on delivery it was almost always just me. Oh, and I only got put on delivery because the guy who was doing it before popped the end of his little finger off when a poorly stacked pallet caught his hand between a door and the stock. I found out that the owner of a Quiznos had been rounding my hours down on my paychecks, and when I confronted her about it, she blowed it off and said I was making way too big a deal over some $40. Then she said, "The Pepsi order isn't going to put itself away, you know." I went out to the front of the store just as people started to line up for the lunch rush, and I took my apron off and left. Halfway to the door the store manager caught up to me and we left together, and the store owner only caught onto it as she saw us leaving the parking lot. The paychecks kept bouncing. I'm not talking "oh crap, sorry, here's your money" type of thing. It was a small business, so the first time I just figured he forgot to make a deposit into the payroll account. He kept blaming the bank. Eventually just told me to take it out of the register. The other 2 employees didn't get paid. Next check. The next guy was able to take money out of the register, but myself and the third guy couldn't because the money just wasn't in the register. The store needed to pull in 10k/mo to be profitable, and we barely pulled into K. He didn't advertise, didn't get us parts. We were a cell phone repair store in a Walmart, and wouldn't let us do what needed to be done to grow the store. Eventually the manager had it and just walked out. So I got stuck watching the store while the owner worked out the payroll issues. My GF at the time lived in Nashville and I lived in NC. She was pregnant and got into some sort of accident, so I booked a trip out there. When I returned to NC, I didn't even bother answering their calls. Never got a final check. They deleted my hours from the payroll system, and I had proof of this and reported them. The state sided with them because I couldn't prove I actually worked those hours. I quit a part-time job when my idiot of manager changed the schedule on Wednesday, so I was scheduled to work on Thursday, which was a night I had made clear I couldn't work due to my full-time job. Of course he doesn't tell me he changed the schedule. I get home Thursday, dead tired, and pour myself a glass of wine and settle in for my first quiet evening in ages, and the phone rings. It's the idiot of manager's boss asking why I wasn't at work. So I pull out my copy of the schedule and tell him exactly when I was scheduled to work. He asks, "So, are you coming in?" I paused as if I was considering it, then answered, "No, I'm quitting. Zero regrets." My first job was a telemarketer as a senior high school student. I should have known it was super shady by our script showing lots of locations crossed out from where they were located previously, and the office looking like it could be packed up at any moment. Even the script had canned responses to questions, like "how much money is it in total?" and we were supposed to answer "I'm not really sure. I'm not very good at math." Anyways, everything was confirmed when I became friends with one of the most tenured telemarketers there, and he said they basically get your credit card and charge a whole bunch of money on it, which is the lump sum plus all these hidden fees/charges. I quit at the end of the day. Nothing serious. I was hired at a company and was promised $13.50 an hour. Well, first check came and it was $4.13. Told my supervisor. Second and third check came and nothing changed. Went to my manager both times. We got paid every fortnight. When I got my fifth check and I saw nothing had changed, I just quit on the spot. When I was 17, I worked in a sports shoe store in a mall. I had this manager that would constantly require that we upsell more items to customers and would yell at us if we did not attempt to do so. I had worked there for a few months and had been relatively happy, but this manager was always on our case to upsell more and more items as it made the store look good to other stores in our franchise. One afternoon, a boy in his late teens, wearing tattered, old dingy clothes with mismatched shoes that were falling apart, walked in very aware that people were looking at him and judging due to his appearance. I greeted him and asked what I could do for him. Timidly, he told me he had a job interview coming up and needed a new pair of tennis shoes. I showed him a couple of options, but he shot them down quickly. I could see we were way out of his price range, but somehow he was brave enough to ask if we had anything in the $20 range. This was a place that normally sold Jordans and other $100+ shoes. I knew we had a couple pairs in the back that had been put away after a clearance sale and were supposed to be shipped back to corporate. I grabbed a few pairs in his size and found a pair that worked for him quickly after. As we head to the register to ring him up, he still has this look on his face that I won't forget. He pulls out a sandwich baggie of worn dollar bills and a bunch of coin change. Now I know it is probably embarrassing for his guy to come into a shopping mall with this on his to-do list, so I help count everything behind the counter, only to find he is about $0.40 short. I grabbed some change I had in my pocket and told him not to worry about it. He smiles, thanks me for the help, and walks out. My manager came over instantly after and starts to berate me in the front of customers and coworkers about not following store policy and trying to upsell to each and every customer. She watched the whole sale unfold and just couldn't grasp why I would even attempt to sell more thing to this guy. I grabbed my things from the back and walked out, only to go back a week later to pick up my last check. I didn't make a scene or anything cool, just walked out. Frick that manager in that place. Former front desk clerk. I was 18, and it was my first time working alone on a Friday night. The assistant manager left early to be with her boyfriend and assumed I could handle the rest of my shift alone. Unbeknownst to both of us, the maids fricked us over big time by marking every room as clean despite not actually having cleaned them all. I sold our extra rooms to walk-ins and suddenly discovered that we had oversold about 20-30 rooms. The people that were without clean rooms were the ones that had booked far in advance. This was a tiny hotel, so we had no maids after 4 p.m. and I got to experience firsthand an angry mob full of people yelling at me in the lobby, demanding refunds, and all but threatening bodily harm. One lady even accused me of giving her cancer. Neat. Since I was young and didn't know how to handle it, I actually excused myself from the desk for a second to cry in the back room. Eventually I pulled it together, called my manager, and started working it all out. Then someone called down to have me unclog a toilet. In my distressed state I got poop on me. I came down to my manager and said I was done. F that job. It wasn't even very good on the best days anyway. Worked at a petland in high school. They didn't take very good care of the animals. A vet visited once a week, but if anything happened in the meantime there was no taking them anywhere. I only worked there about a month. I opened with the manager one day and 2 lovebirds had gotten in a fight overnight. One lost a foot. My manager took it to the back, put it in a small cage, and put a towel over it. I kept asking when the vet was coming, and my manager kept brushing it off. By midday it was apparent they were just going to let it die. Out of sight, out of mind. They finally said the vet would be in 3 days, like it was no big deal. I cried, ran out and never went back. I've told everyone I've known since then how awful they are. In hindsight I wish I would done more, but teen me didn't have the backbone I do now. I'm a cook, and it was 2 stages. The first stage was my boss moved me from nice weekday prep shifts to busy weekend night closing shifts without asking me or even discussing it with me. She just posted the schedule. This was because a night cook quit due to the crazy workload of night shifts. Second stage was a busy Saturday night when all hell just broke loose. Had order tickets puking out of the machine with no end in sight. About 3 hours in, I remember going into the walk-in freezer, closing my eyes while breathing deep and hard in a panic. I was just trying to calm myself. I think it was the first time in my life I actually had a panic attack, or close to it. Finished the night, cleaned the kitchen up, and went home. Wrote out my 2-week notice, and gave it to my boss the next day. No job is worth that level of stress. We should have had 2-3 cooks in that kitchen for how busy it was on the weekends. Not 1. This is a long one. Worked as a nail technician at a fancy spa, and it was the most toxic environment I've ever worked in. The owner was the mom. The manager was her daughter, and the daughter's husband also worked there, and none of them got along. They made me work on a lady with staph infection in her leg knowingly and just had me wear gloves. They used old hotel sheets cut up as wax strips. Made me do things I wasn't licensed to do. I was younger and not confident enough to tell these people not to take advantage of me. Would steal my clients, steal my tips, and I know this for a fact because we all had individual codes we used to do anything on the computers, so I could see who moved my app, etc. I had things stolen out of my purse in the employees area, and not to mention how awful some of the uppity, rich clients can be while you're scrubbing their nasty feet. I asked to get off a couple hours early because I literally had zero apps for the rest of the day, and I needed to meet up with my sister to work on a speech for our dad's retirement party. The owner did not like that for some reason and walked up to the front and put herself down in my appointments for the rest of the day, so I couldn't leave. One of the other girls I worked with, who also didn't have any appointments, just told me to go home, and she would do it because she saw how fricked up the owner was being. Unfortunately, that wasn't my last day either. I came back for a couple more months because I had just gotten my car totaled and for the first time had a car payment plus rent and everything else, so I couldn't just leave. The last straw was when it was summertime, where pedicures are a hot commodity. They don't care about proper cleaning procedures or proper breaks. They only care about how many clients they can service in a day. If you got apps added to your original schedule, a front desk girl would come give you a post-it with your new added app. I kept getting post-it after post-it, and I realized they just took out my lunch break to add another pedicure, which is something they have done before, but after all the other bullcrap I could not deal. 10 hours with no breaks. Being hunched over like that is too much, especially when you're fresh out of fricks to give. I wrote a note to the owner saying I couldn't do it anymore. She called me right after and tried desperately to get me back, asking what schedule I wanted, offering more money, less apps in a day, blah, blah, blah. Nothing cold made me go back there. Everyone constantly talked crap about each other, and you could feel the bad vibes walking in. If they'd been fighting, they lied about products, services, health codes, and at the end of the day all they cared about was money. There's so much more too. That's just the tip of the iceberg of nastiness. I've never made more money at an hourly job, and I've also never regretted walking the frick out of that awful place. I was a pizza boy, and I popped a tire on a delivery. When I got back, the first thing the owner said to me was, "Well, was the pizza okay?" Told her to frick off and quit on the spot. I was closing down the Cozzalis Pizza, now Villa Pizza, at the mall when I was 16. I had a small line of 4 people with a really impatient lady at the end. I helped each person as professionally as possible, but through each person the last lady kept interjecting, "What's the hold up?" or "Can you hurry this up?" and just being rude the whole time. So much so the other customers looked at her. When I finally got to her, we didn't have what she wanted. She told me to make it new, which was against policy as we were 5 minutes to close, and I explained policy. Her anger rose a great deal about this time. I politely said I'd give her anything we still had available at discount she would like. She declined very rudely by calling me a cocksucker motherfucker. I could then demanded again that I make her fresh pizza. I again said no and refused her service. She asked if I could speak to the manager. I flipped my hat around and said, "Bitch, I'm the manager." I closed up shop, came in the next day, my day off, then gave my keys to the manager. Make sure to like and subscribe so we can watch together.